So, I found this story that made me kind of sad, so I thought I would share it. She died on the sidewalk near where she grew up. She was LA's 959th homeless death this year. Hold on, sorry, I'm trying to get my controller to connect. There it is, okay. Sylvia Magley was 63 years old, was well on her way to becoming a statistic in a region where each year we break records for the number of people who die on our streets. She was deteriorating quickly in Granada Hills, anchored in her regular spot outside a real estate office on Balboa Boulevard, just south of San Fernando Mission Boulevard. She was skin and bones, and she refused to eat, said Sandra, a homeless woman who lives on the pavement near a Target store less than a block away. She was very sick. Pilar Chavo, a Chatsworth resident who takes water and food to homeless people in the western San Fernando Valley and lobbies for more shelter, beds, and housing, recalls stopping to see Maglia on the wretchedly hot Labor Day weekend when the mercury hit 118 in Granada Hills. That's her. One of the things that struck me about her was how very thin she was, with just bones poking out. Shivo said, "She told me that Maglia had spilled something inside her green tent and was preoccupied with cleaning it up. She said thank you, and she was kind and sweet, but she had what definitely seemed like it could be mental problems. She was distracted and busy with her cleaning project," said Shivo, who left Maglia a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and some other food and water. Last Sunday, 2 weeks after that initial visit, Shivo swung by the same spot to check on Maglia, but all she found was a shopping cart full of things she assumed were Maglia's. Shivo drove around looking for her with no luck. She later learned that on Friday evening, September 18th, Maglia had died on the street where she had been a fixture for years. When Maglia died, I heard from John Horn, who serves on the Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council and leads its homelessness committee. We can talk about ending homelessness all we want, but until we get actual housing services in our community, then it's all just talk, Horn said. We have to make it known that people die on the streets, even in our community. We have to make a change. Last year, homeless deaths in LA County were averaging about 3 a day and rapidly on their way to topping 1,000 mark as the year closed out. When I wrote about it on December 14th, the toll was 960. Last week, while looking into Maglia's death, I called the county medical examiner coroner's office and asked where the count stood this year. I was stunned by spokeswoman Sarah Ardolani's answer. The death toll was already at 962. With 3 months left in 2020, this year's total is sure to obliterate last year's shameful record. I went through the list of deaths and a few statistics jumped out. More than 80% of the victims were male. The average death was 48, more than 30 years younger than the countywide average of 82. And just as COVID-19 has hit communities of color harder, highlighting deep-seated disparities, Black people are disproportionately represented in the homeless death count. Black people represent about 9% of the country population, but 26% of the deaths. At 256, the highest total by race was Hispanic Latino at 344, while white people accounted for 328 of the homeless deaths. Deaths occurred throughout the country with a high concentration in and around downtown Los Angeles. The coroner's office and public health department are analyzing the numbers for a report due in November, and with roughly a quarter of the deaths, no cause has yet been listed. Among cases that do list causes, trend lines follow these of recent years, and with lots of cardiovascular diseases and accompanying issues such as diabetes and liver disease, along with evidence of damage from alcohol and drugs, namely methamphetamines and opiates. 20 homeless people died by homicide and 18 by suicide. Dr. Paul Simon, who is studying the numbers for the county public health department, said COVID-19 appears to have been a factor in at least 44 of the deaths. But he didn't think that either the virus or the extreme heat has been a major driver of the increase. Simon surmised that the high death count may be largely related to the rise in the homeless population. The sheer number of people living on the streets during COVID has gone up because of the economic decline and people losing their jobs and being evicted, even though there are supposed to be protections in place. In Granada Hills, I caught up with Sylvia Magley's brother, who detailed a long history of issues with his younger sister. He said Sylvia clashed with their parents, an aeronautical engineer and homemaker. When she was in her teens, she was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but often refused medication or treatment. Sometimes she was aggressive enough that he feared she'd try to harm him. He said his sister was married and divorced, often turned to drugs, and resisted many of his attempts to help. Long story short, it all seemed inevitable, said Brent, who reminded me of dozens of those with homeless, mentally ill relatives I've spoken to over the years. They are inevitably frustrated by the lack of appropriate housing and by the difficulty of getting professional help for someone who resists it. Councilman John Lee, who represents Council District 12, has been criticized by some constituents for not stepping up on homeless housing. Lee, whose predecessor Mitch Engler could soon go to prison on corruption charges, inherited Engler's failure to produce more housing than he has now been in office for more than a year. District 12 is one of 6 council districts that may not have met a pledge, agreed to in March 2018 to build 222 units of supportive housing by July of this year. The district meager 54 units built so far puts it in tie for the lowest in the city. Lee told me that he expects to make progress in coming weeks on a number of housing and homeless service projects, including at least one involving a state program to use motels for supportive housing. I'm in a hotel now, so. As for Sylvia Magley, Lee said his office had been aware of her situation and attempts to help her for years. Her case, he said, sheds light on the challenge of assisting people with mental illness who resist help. Social workers from DMH have visited Sylvia probably 2 or 3 times a week in the last few months. Lee is right about the challenge, and I got a good education on that when it took me and mental health professionals roughly a year to persuade my friend Nathaniel to come inside for help. Mental illness can create doubts, fears, lack of trust. Often for good reason, it can make the thoughts of leaving familiar surroundings, no matter how harsh, terrifying. It's true. The key, as Lee said, is to keep going back and building trust until the no becomes a yes. But as I reminded the councilman, you have to have somewhere to take the person, and Los Angeles has too few options for years. Maglia's brother, a retired lawyer, was frustrated about how laws designed to protect his sister's rights might have worked against her. There is, by the way, an ongoing debate about the grave disability bar that must be met to force someone into help, even if they refuse. In hindsight, Maglia's life might have been saved if, given her condition and the savage heat, she had been taken to the hospital. Instead, she died just a few blocks from the house she grew up in. Well-wishers left flowers and candles at the base of a utility pole near her spot. A UPS man who used to give Maglia bottles of water when he made pickups and deliveries at a nearby Century 21 taped a note to the makeshift memorial reading, "Rest in peace," scrawled on the back of a "Sorry we missed you" form. A U.S. flag was wrapped around the pole, and above it someone had attached a framed photo of Maglia. It was my first and only look at her. In the photo, Maglia has curly hair and glasses, and she's wearing a Zuma Beach t-shirt and a necklace with a cross pendant. She is waving to someone, maybe hello and maybe goodbye. She is smiling. Oh, I guess that's the end of the article. Okay. So, a couple of things that I want to talk about here because, obviously I see myself in this. Okay. I'm trying to get back to where I was, but, okay. So, when it comes to people who are mentally ill, well, it's hard to help us because we fight it. We fight. We fight and we fight and we fight and we fight. And I'm saying we because I am one of them. I am a mentally ill, homeless person who fights. And here, a lot of people won't fight back. With Maglia, they said people were coming to her at least twice a week, talking to her, trying to convince her to go inside, trying to build up their trust. I didn't have that. When I was in the truck, they came once to try to talk me into going into a shelter. And they came angry and threatening. And then they didn't understand why that caused me to be more afraid and have more trust issues. It's hard. A lot of people probably just walk past her every day and didn't know what she was going through in her heart and in her mind. I wish that there was a way to get people to understand that we are human and we're not trying to be difficult. There's a genuine fear of human beings, even ones that are coming to help us. And it's not our intention to make life harder for you, but we're having a real hard time that we can't do it on our own and we also can't accept help for. This woman sat on a sidewalk and starved to death. I sat in a truck and starved to death. I didn't die only because I left because I didn't want to die in the truck. Like, literally, the only reason I left that church was because I was planning to die and I didn't want to do it there at the church. There was no help for me at that church. The only time they came to help me, they were angry. And when I left, I did not expect to wind up in LA in a hotel. When I left, I had gone a long time without eating. I had malnourished and dehydrated myself to the point that my period stopped. And I had my phone turned off so that I couldn't call for help. And I had just intended to go die. And God decided that it wasn't my time to die. He gave me a body that just won't give up. But there's so many other people out there that are hurting and thinking the exact same way, that if they died, they wouldn't be a burden to everybody that's trying to help them anymore. What's hard is sometimes accepting that somebody you love has mental issues. Her brother seemed, I don't know, maybe it's just the way I read it, he seemed like he didn't care very much, like he had already lost everything with her. And that's the way a lot of families get. They just kind of, the homeless mentally ill one fades off and the family just moves on as if they didn't exist. They didn't matter. And everybody will downplay it and pretend that it wasn't as bad as it was. Like with me, it's bad, y'all. I'm not making up my breakdowns. I'm not making up my struggles and my thought processes and my fears. But people don't believe me because I don't know, not on drugs, not elderly. I don't look like the typical homeless mentally ill person. So people will say, well, you're not really mentally ill though. There's nothing really wrong with you. But there is. And, I scream out desperate for somebody to hear me and understand that I have problems. And I feel like I'm never going to be heard because I don't look like I have problems. My own friend ignored everything I ever said and just, people see me as still that girl that they went to high school with, and they can't get through their mind that I'm mentally not okay. That's why I want to normalize the idea of mental illness. That's a big part of what my channel is showing the world what it really looks like. It's not the movies. It's not drug addicts out on the street on the news. But I feel like I'm failing that because my own friends can't accept that I have mental issues. And they probably won't until I get to the point that I look like Sylvia. What the hell is that?